Okay, we're going to start our Mesa City Council study session for March 17th, 2025. Welcome. Looks like we almost have all the seats filled up. Thank you for being here. Councilmember Heredia, you're here on Zoom, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. And then all of our council members will be present. So we're going to start out. Item 1 is to review the agenda for tonight's meeting. Let's go through that agenda. Council, if there's any questions to that, we have staff here to answer that. Do you have a question?
No, I think we handled it all in a 3 hour meeting. I guess it's all on you.
You know what, I'm just going to, some places a microphone, I don't know, I'm going to use. All right.
Sorry.
It'll be brief, I promise. Item 6A, we didn't get to it last Thursday, but if I could just get a quick overview on our change, because I'm so glad this is happening, and I just want to publicly acknowledge the change on our licensing for secondhand dealers.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council Member, Councilman Duff. Leanne Cardenas, I'm the Assistant Director for Business Services and was one person helping with this change. What it will do is for people selling secondhand items, vintage goods and stuff that want to come into the city and do it just like at a vendor fair downtown. If one of the vintage shops wants to bring in fellow business people and wants to hold a vendor fair, they won't have to go through our secondhand license because they're just selling items. We're adding to, if they're only here selling items and not purchasing from the general public, they won't need a secondhand license. They'll still need a transaction privilege tax license and report the Mesa tax to us, but no secondhand license.
I'm very excited about this because we do have a downtown business that wants to do markets, little vintage markets. And our secondhand license before was a background check, a couple $100 or whatever the fee is. And you know, it's very, and you'd be having a small market for one day. That's too much effort and cost to make it worthwhile. So now I'm glad that we'll be able to have some markets that are selling vintage or used goods in our in the city without having to go through, you know, the background check and fingerprinting and a high licensing fee.
Yes, we're very excited to also help out at the Antique Mall that runs fairs on occasion during the winter time and brings a bunch of vendors there too. They won't need them either, as long as they're just selling. They won't have anything to report. And that's the main reason for the secondhand license, is to report when they purchase goods to make sure they're not stolen. They have to file a report with our police department. That's that.
Thank you very much for your work on this.
You're welcome.
Good, thank you. Vice Mayor?
So you hit on it. So the purpose of this ordinance originally was to stop from selling stolen goods. So has Mesa PD had input on this and they're good with the changes?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
That's
Very
it? Yeah. So I have a couple of questions. I missed the last meeting, but 4B is a fire station 224. I'm glad for that. Beth, if you want to come up and just share some information, timelines on that. 80th Street and Elliott, I believe, and help reduce.
District 6 is that?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yes,
think
sir.
it's D6,
It is.
yes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yes, Fire Station 224, the construction contract is on this agenda. It will be a three base station going in at that location that you just mentioned on 80th Street north of Elliott. So it will be starting construction here very shortly. It'll be about a year to complete it and complete construction, get to the point we can cut a ribbon.
Great. Will you be here?
I got a plan.
Just thought I would ask.
I got another plan, sorry.
That's totally on the agenda, right, Jim?
Well, I think it's important that we're proactive in putting our public safety facilities out. We're using the data to do that. So it's important to reduce our response times in those areas. So that's what I appreciate, using the data today.
Community room?
Is there a community room in this?
I believe this one does have a community room, but I have to check.
I'm sure there'll be one at the new Eastmark Library. We'll have one there.
Yes, the library has community space too.
Good. Thank you. Then I just want to ask a question on 4D. First, I've heard of SCBA cleaning. I don't know if fire's here, but regardless, usually we don't wash helmets. I mean, we wear them. As a former firefighter, I'll preempt that. We wear our helmets as a badge of honor, but now we're going to clean them. Hi, Chief. How are you? Sorry for you up here. Yeah. So helmet clean.
Be happy with that. She has a different law.
Yeah. So helmet cleaning, typically, we've not done that in the past. So why now? And SCBA cleaning?
Mayor Freeman, members of the council, thank you for asking this question. As we're going through cancer mitigation and cancer risk reduction, we found that in the SCBA packs and on the helmets that we have not cleaned in the past because it was a badge of honor. The dirtier the helmet, the more work you've done. That still emits fumes and still emits toxins. So this is something we're working on grant dollars to pay for also, and we're trying to do all we can to mitigate the risk of cancer for our members. So making sure our helmets are cleaned properly and making sure the SCBA packs are cleaned properly is another way to kind of reduce the risk for our membership.
Good. So I guess the ones in my home I'll need to take out and bring them here to get them
We'll
washed.
clean them for you for free. How's that?
Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
Pardon? Yeah.
So, Chief, I assume that there's been studies on this, right, that show that those pieces of equipment do contribute to cancer causing? Okay.
Yep,
But
absolutely.
is it the pieces of equipment or the residue that attaches to that equipment?
It's the residue from the calls that we have from cancer on the fires and things like that, all the smoke and the residue that kind of attach themselves to the helmet and to the SCBA packs is what they're going to be absorbing from these cleaners.
So now when they come back from a call, Chief, I mean, we're washing down all the equipment, the truck, all the personal gear that the employees have had on them, just so that we're trying to do everything we can to mitigate against any kind of cancer carcinogen that may be attached to even the vehicles, the equipment, and certainly the equipment that they're wearing. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Mr. Brady's right. Before we leave any scene on a fire, now we decon, we spray them down and decon them on the scene so they take as little back to the station as possible. And then to really make sure that the helmets and the back, because the packs, you know, our gear we have washed, that's why we have 2 sets of gear, because when we have a big fire, they take their gear in to be washed to kind of reduce the risk. But the packs, they've done a lot of studies to say there's still a lot of carcinogens on the packs from the residue from the fires. And so we want to make sure that those are cleaned as well, too. Thank you for asking that.
Would you like to
I don't
weigh
want to
in?
drag this meeting out because we don't have a lot of time, but are your packs in the side compartments or are they in the cab of the truck?
So we took them out of the cabs, all of our cabs. Now,
Okay.
over the last 3 years, we have permission, from council and city management to do clean cabs. So all of our
Okay.
packs have been taken out, but still, when you have them, even in the compartments, every time you open it, if they're emitting gases, that's still another way to.
Right. Yeah, I did some work with the National Fire Protection Association, some related to this. And what happens is, one, you carry it home with you, which makes a lot of sense. But also, when we probably had dirty helmets and all that, it was a badge of honor. But what they have found now is that as you go back into a burning building, could be a next call, months later, years later, it heats that and that starts to release the toxic gases again off of the residue that's on the helmet. So getting them clean, getting the SCBA's clean is all very much appreciated.
Yep, sure.
Thank you, Chief.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So 5B is the authorization of general bond obligations. Is there someone who can explain a little bit about that? Our obligations there. Mark, thank you. Had a great meeting with you the other day, last week.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Mark Hughes, City Treasurer.
Yes, so let's talk about the bonds and some of the cost savings there as far as the interest rates, overall interest. Are we going to talk about that later?
We're going to talk about right now. So these are new, this is the new money issue, right? So
Sure.
these bonds will go to pay for or reimburse the city's cost for a variety of large projects, whether it's the Northeast Public Safety Complex, whether it's fire stations, whether it's the police headquarters, libraries, the Idea Museum. Help me out, Mark, what am I missing?
There's a lot of projects.
Okay, but those are the larger projects.
water
that we're
projects.
reimbursing from the general obligation bonds. The good news is, I think we shared with the council earlier today that the question was for the average outstanding debt, what we're paying on interest. To date, general obligation bonds were at 2.57%, and for utility bonds, we're at 3.18%. Now, do not expect that that will be the rates that we'll be paying. It's a different environment, as you can imagine, in April. But again, this is over all the outstanding bonds that we have. So there obviously are, it's cyclical. There are years where we sold bonds at very competitive rates. And obviously, we're not quite in that same environment right now today, but on average, pretty competitive rates.
So Mark, in my years of doing this, we have a spending limit. Municipalities are appraised in their value, and so bonds are given out. I think that, and being sold, at what percent rate are we able to leverage that bond?
So the state puts out an indebtedness report, and that typically comes out mid-December, but the 2024 report hasn't been published yet by the state. So what we did was we internally calculated it with the assistance of our financial advisor, and I believe we are at about 20% of our capacity, 20.4 if I recall correctly. So,
And that's general obligation bonds, GO bonds.
that's me.
I think that's really prudent, the way we're financially well off that way, by only issuing bonds. And I think as we pay off, we self-pay the bonds, then we pay ourselves back as we move forward. And I think that's an important concept. Is there any comment on that?
Mayor, that helps with arbitrage requirements as well, because we can't keep, because we issue in a tax exempt environment, we can't hold the money for an extended period of time, if that makes sense. So by reimbursing ourselves, that assists with us not holding on to these monies longer than we're allowed to with IRS regulations. So.
Okay, good, thank you. Any more comments, council? Well, thank you. I heard you did. Well, good. With that, yes, sir.
And my understanding, just for clarity, is the general obligation bonds, we were looking at better than a 70% voter approval margin.
I think it was about right at 70%.
About 70%,
Yeah, I
okay.
believe that's correct.
And I also thought I received that email regarding the overall rates. I thought it was better than I expected. And I understood that won't continue, but for the general market, I thought that was very, very competitive. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Anything else, council? If not, we'll move to item 2A. 2A is the presentation on funding recommendations for the fiscal year 25-26 and prior years. Available funding for CDBG, home, ESG, and home services programs. And we have Michelle and Justin here. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Freeman, Vice Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm here to talk to you this evening about our funding recommendations for fiscal year 25-26 for both our federal and local funds that our office administers. But before we get into the actual presentation, I just wanted to start and say I know that there's been information on the budget that's been unclear at the federal level. And so we are continuing today through our process as we normally would, because our funding process takes approximately 9 months. So for us to be able to meet HUD's requirements for their timelines, we need to continue to go through this process. However, on Friday of last week, there was a continuing resolution that was passed, which will continue through September 30th. Now, that doesn't include any new funding, it's just to keep the government going. However, for our programs, we have already been allocated those dollars to get us through the rest of the fiscal year. But for these dollars, we haven't had any notification of what the budget is yet. So if there's an event that the funding is cut significantly, then we would come back to City Council. If it's a small amount, approximately 10%, we can make those adjustments administratively. So I know there's probably lots of questions, so I wanted to start out with that. Okay. So just want to give you a quick background on what our division does and what funding we administer. So we do have both local and federal funding. We have our Community Development Block Grant Program, Home Investment Partnership, and our Emergency Solutions Grants. Those are all federal. We also have our Human Services funding and ABC, or a Better Community funding. The Better Community funding is a utility donation, and so the amounts vary on what gets allocated to those funds. We do receive our federal dollars from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and every year we submit an annual action plan after we come to council with the funding recommendations, and that is submitted to HUD and basically lists our priorities and how we anticipate spending those dollars for the upcoming year. These dollars can address priority housing needs and basic needs, as well as preserving neighborhoods and improving the quality of life for Mesa residents. So just a quick background, typically the budget is prepared at the congressional level for congressional appropriation. The CDBG, Home and ESG fall under the transportation bill. Each program is allocated to the city based on a formula that includes population, poverty, overcrowding, size of the city. So we are an entitlement community, which means that the city of Mesa automatically, as long as there's a budget that's passed, automatically will receive those funds every year based on that formula. And then we, as a city, are free to design how we want to utilize those funds to meet the most critical needs in our community. So just real quickly, again, we have our 3 federal funding sources that we'll be discussing tonight, as well as Human Services and ABC. So before we get into the actual allocations, I just wanted to give you a quick background on how the funding process works. As I mentioned, it is about a 9-month process. We issue a notification of funding availability in September. And then we typically have an agency funding kickoff, which is the next month. And that's the pictures you can see here on the screen. That was our funding kickoff with agencies, and we provide information on the funding sources and work with each agency to determine the best application for their proposal. Then the applications are submitted and reviewed for eligibility by staff. And again, for our federal programs, we're really looking at capacity and the agency's ability to successfully spend those dollars. Human Services has a little bit different criteria because it doesn't have the federal regulations. Then the agencies present to the Housing and Community Development Advisory Board. That's in December. That's an opportunity for the board to ask follow-up questions on their applications, as well as the agency to really highlight what their specific program is and what the dollars will be used for. We do application scoring. And the scoring, I'll get into a little more in detail on one of my next slides, but it is a combination of both the Housing Community Development Advisory Board and staff scores. And then finally, after we've come to council and have approved the funding recommendations, we submit our plan to HUD, and after they have approved it, we are able to move forward with the contracts for agencies. I will let you know that this year, which has been a little bit different than the past, we did get notification from HUD that we cannot submit our agency annual plan until we have the allocations announced. In the past, we were able to submit it, but just wait until the allocations came. So that's a little bit different this year. In terms of the process timeline, we begin in August with that NOFA and the funding kickoff. I went through most of this, but where we are today is we have presented to CCD on February 24th, and so our next step today is to present to City Council, and then we are coming back on May 12th for the formal approval of the recommendations. Some considerations for funding when we are doing the funding kickoff for the agencies, and also when we're evaluating the applications, is we want to make sure that the activity is eligible for that particular funding source. With the CDBG, ESG, and Home, each one of those funding sources have very specific different criteria for eligibility. So that's very important that we look through the eligibility. HUD Consolidated Plan Priorities, we have to develop a 5-year plan. And so we'll be coming to you this Thursday, actually, with our consultant to present that plan to you. And that outlines the priorities and the anticipated funding over the 5-year period. We look at the agency's financial feasibility. Do they have match funds? Will they be able to administer the program successfully financially? Regulatory compliance, of course, we want to make sure that if an agency is funded through the federal dollars, that we are paying for eligible costs. And we look at the agency's past performance and capacity as well, if they've had applications with us or contracts. The Housing Community Development Advisory Board scores the applications. They make up 30 points of the application, and the rest is 70% from the staff, and that's averaged to rank each agency by score. We do every year look at the City Council strategic priorities, as well as we concentrate on the Mesa housing path to self-sufficiency and stable living. Okay. I just wanted to share, we really value our Housing and Community Development Advisory Board. They spend a significant amount of time looking through all these applications and hearing the presentations, some long nights in December. But their role in the process is to review each application. They do have a separate series of questions they evaluate the agencies on. They hear the presentations, score the applications, and then provide input on the funding process. Okay, so in terms of scoring, when staff do the eligibility review and scoring, we're really looking at the past performance of the agency. We look at if there's any information that's not necessarily clear on their application. We follow up with those agencies. So we are working back and forth to try to get the most information in their submittal. The Housing Community Development Board, as I said, they can score up to 30 points. And for this year and last year, we implemented a 5-point reduction for late or no responses to the staff follow-up questions and 5 points if they don't present to the board. Eligible activities. So for CDBG, we have 2 different categories of funding. We have our public service and non-public service. Our public service is more like social service type activities, programs, Meals on Wheels. And then we have our non-public service, which is more the bricks and mortar type activities, which our housing rehab falls under, and facility improvements. For home, that grant is specifically to address housing needs for affordable housing through rental assistance, development of new or homeownership. Emergency Solutions Grant is solely for addressing homelessness, and these are the activities that are eligible here, specifically street outreach, trying to work with individuals in the community and find shelter. And last but not least, we have Human Services, which funds homeless services, youth programs, food and basic needs. There is a list of other criteria, but this is the most that we see in our application process. Okay, so again, I just wanted to preempt by saying that these dollar amounts are based on our previous year's allocation. So the current year for 24-25, these are what our allocations are, and we are basing these funding recommendations on that level of funding. This slide just gives you a quick overview of the amount requested in each category versus the amount that is available. As you can see, it is a very competitive process. All of them have more requests than funding available, but specifically the Human Services ABC, we get quite a few in that application round. So are there any questions I can answer right now before I get into the actual funding recommendations?
Michelle, we might want to just mention, one of the reasons is that's not, the Human Services ABC funds are administered by the city's policies and not by federal rules and regulations.
Correct.
Is that correct? So it makes it less burdensome to spend. So that may be one of the reasons why they're so interested in applying for city dollars.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. That's a very good point.
Council, any questions so far? You're all good? All right, proceed on.
Okay, very good. So for our CDBG public services, we can only allocate 15% of our dollars for public services. I did want to point out that this order that we have on the slide matches your funding sheet, so it should be easier for you to follow through rather than how we have done it in the past. As I mentioned, the agencies are ranked by their score, and so this is in order of score all the way down. So we fully fund the top agencies with their score down to La Mesita Family Shelter. And I also wanted to point out that we had set aside for this year $301,000 for our homeless for our Office of Homeless Solutions, that's that we could address navigation. So in the past, agencies have requested funding for navigation, but they've proposed where their navigators are going to be and what their service is. So in turn, this year, we're going to be asking for specific criteria for those navigators. So that is a total of $602,000 for CDBG Public Services. Any questions on that slide? Okay.
I don't see any yet.
Okay.
Carry on.
Well, this one is only one, so hopefully there won't be a lot of questions here. But so our other pot of the CDBG dollars is our 65% of non-public services. And we are recommending funding for our core city program that is administered from the city. It's our emergency rehabilitation program. And from last year, as you can see with the heat relief, we assisted about 131 individuals and also spent almost $4 million on that program. So it's become very popular, and we've been partnering with the Office of Homeless Solutions on those heat-related methods.
Just quickly, Michelle, just kind of talk about what those kind of improvements would be as we identify, sometimes we're getting called, working with the fire department as they identify individuals that they're constantly going out to assist. We identify that as an opportunity to serve. Maybe just quickly, what are the types of emergency rehabs that we can provide in those cases?
Sure, great question. We can fund up to $25,000 for the emergency. However, because of the demand, we have been prioritizing seasonal repairs. So for instance, in the summertime, that's pretty much the repairs we're doing. However, we can do other repairs such as ADA improvements. We can do work on mobile homes, which we can't do in any other program. So that's a significant amount of the community that we serve. Air conditionings, roofing, if their door doesn't lock, if they need a ramp, those are some of the improvements. And it is a grant, so it is a popular program. Okay, so we are recommending funding of $2.5 million for the emergency repair program. Any questions on that slide?
Does that many get used up every year?
It does.
Oh,
It
yeah.
absolutely does.
We have a waiting list on that.
We do have a wait list. I'll let Justin, if you want to mention just kind of wait list.
Council, presently we have a wait list of approximately 35 households. We have been chipping away slowly but steady at that wait list, but unfortunately prioritizing the summer needs, as Michelle has mentioned, HVACs, the furnaces are taking priority at this juncture.
Is there a limit on the amount of monies that each applicant can have towards their, whatever rehab they're doing on their building or home?
Yes, Mayor Freeman, members of council, the maximum amount of assistance we could provide is $25,000 in a fiscal year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we'll move on to the Home Investment Partnership Program. We have this broken out into two categories. We have our tenant-based rental assistance, which offers additional subsidy for folks who are trying to do rental deposit to move into a new home or a new rental. And that is $400,000 for the rent utility deposit. We also have Community Bridges for their tenant-based rental assistance. That one's different from the core City Mesa program because that provides actual rental assistance for up to 2 years, where our program just helps them do their rental deposit and then move on. For home rental development, we have two proposals that are recommended for funding, New Leaf La Mesita Phase 4 construction, as well as Copa Health, Beverly Family. Both of these applications will be submitting funding requests to the Arizona Department of Housing for low-income housing tax credits. So this funding would be contingent upon their successful award because they would need that funding to complete the project.
So this counts towards the local contribution in their scoring, right?
Absolutely. Very good point, Chris. Yes. Mayor, council. So when Arizona Department of Housing issues their grant each year, they have specific criteria that you can score higher points, and that changes. But typically, if there's leveraged funding with home dollars, that gives them additional points as well. And home is really designed for gap funding for projects, anywhere from like $1 million to $4 million, depending on the size of the project. And it's really just to get those extra points in the LIHTC and then to have some additional subsidy in the units. Okay, then we have our Emergency Solutions Grant. Yes.
I have a question on that.
Mr. Adams.
So
With respect to the 3 million and the 1 million, total of $4 million for, this is new construction?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, it is, sir.
Who owns the real estate when the project is complete?
So Mayor, Council, Councilmember Adams, so the property is owned by a New Leaf, and they would continue to own the property. We would have a lien on the property and restrictive covenants so that they have their affordability period that they have to continue to operate for. So the minimum would be 20 years. The city can add additional years on top of that. And if they are getting LIHTC, it's usually 30 to 35 years of affordability.
So there's a lien, and let's presume in the Copa Health model, so there's a lien for $1 million. Does that get repaid, or is that just a lien for a period of time to ensure performance?
Mayor, Council, Councilmember Adams, they do not have to repay the dollars back. So what the agreement is for the home program, as long as they're keeping the property affordable for a certain number of years, even beyond what home requires, then that's contributing to the affordability of homes.
Yeah, so the goal is here, the federal government wants to make sure that their match, their assistance to these programs, and for a significant long period of time accomplishes the goals of our overall plan, or I can't remember what you just talked about, but the consolidated plan, thank you, that we have to help provide housing for low-income individuals.
Understood. One last quick question. If at some point in time the organizations decide to sell the real estate, who gets the money?
So Mayor, Council, Councilmember Adams, as long as they sell it after they've met the affordability period, they would be able to keep those proceeds. But if they want to sell within the affordability period, then they would have to pay those dollars back to the city. And it would be based on fair market value where they're getting the dollars from.
But that's, again, 20, 30 years out into the future.
Yes, absolutely.
Otherwise, they pay it back to us.
Correct. If I could just add, with the home dollars, there is a 25% match from the organization, so they do have to put in non-federal sources into the project. It could be donated labor, it could be in-kind donations, or private fundraising.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome. Okay, any other questions on this particular slide? Okay. So we're going back to emergency solutions, and this grant is specifically for addressing homelessness. We have 65% of our dollars can go to shelter services. That's the maximum. So we have set that aside on that second row, the shelter services. Our first activity is rapid rehousing, so to get folks into more permanent housing from shelter. And then for shelter services, we have 3 agencies recommended for funding. That total is $329,000. Any questions there? Okay, so we'll move on to Human Services, ABC. And again, this is where we have the most requests for funding. The allocation amount or process was the same as how we did the allocations based on score for all the other funding sources. So if you'd like me to go through any individually, I'm happy to do that. I know you have the spreadsheets in front of you as well.
Any requests, council, or just?
I have comments, but I'll wait till she's.
Okay, continue on, Michelle.
I'm happy to go through each one, but I know you've all read it too, so I don't want to bore everybody. But so this is our second set of recommendations. So what we are looking for in Human Services is not only score, but we want to make sure that we're trying to fund in each different category. So on the spreadsheets that you have, there is a little key at the bottom that talks about the funding type of service. And so we do try to fund those agencies at least to have 1 or 2 in each service. So with that, I wanted to mention the last agency on this page, the Homeless Youth Connection. Their score was very, very close to Mesa United Way. We decided to offer some funding to Homeless Youth Connection so that we would have some type of activity in that category. Okay, and so the next steps, we will issue our public comment period on March 30th, and then it will go for 30 days, and that's on the funding recommendations and our draft annual action plan, which you'll hear about on Thursday. On May 12th, we'll be coming to City Council for approval of the funding recommendations, consolidated plan, and annual plan. And then tentative, well, May 15th is typically when our plan is due to HUD, so that's why I put tentative. We'll wait until we get our funding allocations. And then July 1st obviously begins our new year. Any questions I can answer?
Well, thank you. I'm going to ask Councilmember Heredia, do you have any questions, council member?
No questions.
Thank you. Ms. Spilsbury.
Yes, thank you so much. I chair our council committee for this, and so the three of us that serve on that committee spent over an hour going through all of this and asking lots of questions, and then we've had another meeting besides that. So I just wanted to thank you for all of the hard work that goes into this. I've been a part of this process pretty in depth for the last 3 years, and have spent a lot of time looking at very specific details that I don't think we normally get into as a council, but just I really wanted to, tear apart the scoring rubric and the staff and the development board that scores it as well, just to make sure we were being as fair as possible. And you guys have made a ton of changes at my request, and you've changed some of the procedural things and the timing of things just to make sure that everyone had a fair chance to get scored well. And you've also met with so many of these different organizations and spent time with them to help them turn in the best application possible as well. So I really want to thank you guys and your staff for doing that. This is such a painful thing for me. One of my passions is the nonprofit world, and I've spent the last, over 4 years developing really close relationships with a ton of these organizations, visiting their facilities, seeing what they're doing. Every single one of them has just an incredible mission, and they're all different and they're all needed. And I think it's one of the things that makes our city so beautiful is how many people in our city care about other people and want to help. And this money is so crucial to them to be able to do that. And so, especially on the human services where we have so much more requests than we can possibly give, there's multiple organizations that I'm maybe even on the board of, or that I'm friends with the directors, or that I care deeply about their mission that weren't awarded. And it's really hard. And while council has every purview to ask you to make changes, and I really do try to stick to the scoring, since I have asked so much of you to make that as fair as possible. I feel like that's something that I can't ask for people to be moved around and changed when the scores are the scores. And so I appreciate, although it kills me for organizations to not get funded, I just hate it. But I really, really want to emphasize the great, you guys spend months and months and months on this. And so I just really want to acknowledge that and give weight to that process so that everyone who didn't get funded can know why. And I know you guys follow up with letters and help people understand how they can do better next time and stuff like that too. So anyways, I could go on and on. I think you get my point, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms.
Appreciate that.
Spilsbury. Any other comments? Mr. Adams.
I think that I appreciate the presentation that we had a week or so ago as well. Very much, you provided me a lot of background, which I appreciate, and it does seem like a very in-depth process you go through. I do have a question. When you're evaluating an applicant, how much weight does financial need, fall into it? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. Let's say you have two organizations who provide equal services, but one has a very strong balance sheet, heavy in assets, heavy in net worth, and the other is newer, not quite so well-heeled in their financials. How much does that need come into the picture?
Mayor Freeman, Councilmember Adams. So when we're talking about the federal dollars, what we're looking at is making sure that agencies have not only the capacity with staff, but also the financial capacity. Most of the agencies that apply in the federal dollars, they're applying to other agencies too, like different cities, to do the same service, but they're serving each one of those populations. So typically what those agencies ask for is a portion to fulfill that whole program. There is definitely a level where some agencies may not be able to administer their program if you give them, too little funding. Does that make,
And
does that
can
answer
I
your
just
question?
jump in real quick? I think, Michelle, go to the point too, because it's a good question, but it kind of goes to one of the standards of spending of federal dollars, right? We have to be very careful that we choose organizations that have the capacity to, one, deal within the federal regulations, right? Meet all the compliance and all the reporting that's required. But we also, and this sounds kind of interesting, but we need them to spend the money. So talk about the standard, the limitations we have that HUD tracks very carefully about how much we are able to spend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. So with our federal dollars, we have what's called timeliness expenditure of funds. And so every May, about May 1st, May 2nd, they'll look at our line of credit and see what is in our balance. We cannot have more than 1.5 times our current year's allocation in that balance. Sometimes if agencies can't expend the dollars, then at the end of the year, when their contract's up, we have to reprogram those funds, which adds to our balance. And so we want to make sure that the agencies have the capacity to administer those federal dollars on time, that they can submit the backup documentation, the billing, they can do the reporting.
And they have the experience of doing it.
And they have
Proven
the experience with that. We do express to the agencies, if it is a smaller agency, or maybe they're not versed with the federal regulations, that the Human Services ABC is less onerous for reporting. So we, this year and last year, excuse me, I'm getting sick, so I apologize. This year and last year, we implemented a maximum ask in the human services category, because it is such a small dollar amount, that we want to try to spread the dollars for some of those smaller agencies.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
That answers it. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, I'd just make a quick comment. I appreciated you coming and speaking with all of us individually, giving us time to ask questions and spend time sitting down and really understanding everything. I also appreciate the scoring and how extensive it is, and that you involve residents on the advisory board and input from them. I think that's important. So my only issue I think I brought up when we talked was really just ensuring, and I don't know that you necessarily, I wasn't quite sure when I asked it when we met, if an agency gets preferential treatment, I guess a higher score, if they've received money in the past and performed in the past. I guess my concern really is that new agencies get a chance to get in and be a part of the process and receive funding. I don't love the same agencies over and over and over again, although I'm sure, they do great work in a lot of cases, but I think it's important that we kind of spread it around a little bit. So I don't know if you can talk about, there's no extra, I know they get a higher score if they're able to actually perform and spend the dollars, and so maybe that does count for an agency that's been in it before. I don't know.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you. So basically with, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, Michelle, it kind of goes back to your answer from before to Councilmember Adams, is that I don't know that they get but past performance is important, because if we know that they have the capacity to spend the money in a timely manner, that gives us confidence that they'll be able to do it again. And as Michelle says, so if it's a smaller organization that's kind of just starting into that world, well, we suggest to them, don't go play in the federal pool, right? Stay over here on the general fund pool. Let's give you that experience maybe for a few years. Show us and demonstrate to us that you have the capacity to deliver the services and spend the money. And I think that kind of experience and demonstration certainly would help them if they decided they do want to go play in the federal funding pool. But the federal funding pool is a very complex, challenging for some of these agencies. And what happens is if they're not spending their money, it counts against the city, and we lose the funding if we're not spending the funding. So we've tried to create these pots. It's like over here in the general fund, that's a good place to learn, to grow, and you can do some of the same kind of programs and services. And then again, over on the federal side, the challenge on the federal side, it's capped at 15% for services, right? So it's a very competitive area, and it does lend ourselves to, we want to see people, agencies with the capacity to spend the money. They have projects that are established and ready to go. So is that fair, what I've said?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. I will just add to that, if I could, Mayor Freeman and Councilmember Goforth, that the agencies, gosh, I'm so sorry. I keep losing my train of thought because I'm just not feeling well. So I'm so sorry. Can you
No,
please-
no worries.
I'm so embarrassed.
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, I think one of the other variables that's very important to consider is not only the expenditure of federal funds, but we enter into contractual relationships with these agencies, so it's performance-based outside of the expenditures. So the unduplicated persons or households to be assisted, we're ensuring that the agencies are monthly reporting and making progress towards that. So the tracking isn't only expenditure-based in regards to performance. So that was the only other thing that I wanted to elucidate that I feel is important.
I think that it is important because I don't want there to be sort of this complacency and expectance
Yeah.
each year that they're going to get money. You do have to continue to up your game and perform and be innovative with your programming and everything like that. So that was really my only concern.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, just as a comment to that too, which this isn't anything we're going to figure out right now, but we've talked about in our meetings that we maybe need to look at how we're funding the human services moving forward. We have, 18 or something organizations that didn't get funded. And so obviously there's way, way more people wanting that money and not getting a chance. And if we're sending all the smaller organizations to that pot of money and it's even harder and more competitive, it's just the same ones aren't getting approved year after year after year, and they're great organizations. So trying to kind of figure that out of how we could help some of them be able to take advantage of this money that would be great, and how we can help them. So I don't know, looking forward in the future, I think we need to talk through what we're gonna do with that. And we had talked about whether we pick, we have all these great priorities and they all are priorities. They wouldn't be on there if they weren't priorities. So how do you pick 2 or 3 of the priorities? But maybe as a council at our strategic planning session of our already really packed day, we could talk about that and see if there's certain things that we feel like need to be funded more than others. And that's how we make the decision or whatever. Because I know you guys try to hit at least 1 or 2 in each strategic priority, which is great, but we are just having so many still that aren't getting funded. So I don't know, because I have the same, I've brought that up to you guys every year, the same exact concerns that Councilmember Goforth expressed.
Thank you. Anything else? Well, I'll just finish that, to Ms. Spilsbury, maybe we need to have some workshops, for some of these agencies to learn the processes, because it is complicated. And, kudos to the board giving out their monies and recommendations in the process, but then also administratively keeping us out of trouble. That's a big thing. So with that, thank you, and I think we're done with that. And
Thank you so much.
all right. So item 3 is to acknowledge receipt of minutes. Is there a motion to do that? Mr. Summers, Ms. Duff, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Mr. Heredia, thank you. Motion passes. Next is current events and conferences attended. Council members, do you have anything you'd like to share?
We're over on time, but just really quick, Vice Mayor Summers and I attended the latest Mesa Police Academy graduation. That was awesome. So many more new Mesa police officers, and it's always such a great experience. And then Vice Mayor Summers and Councilmember Duff and I attended the Mesa Arts Center 20th Anniversary Gala on Saturday night, and happy to support them and the incredible facility gem that we have in our city that's not just city or statewide, but this whole region. It's such a a asset to our community, so.
Thank you.
Ms. Duff? Okay. Mr. All right, hearing that, Mr. Brady, what's our next meeting schedule?
Next meeting will be Thursday morning, March 20th at 7:30 a.m. See you then.
Okay, they'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Summers. Mr. Adams, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, Mr. Reddy. We'll see you upstairs.